First, we got Brenden Schaeffer jumping in with us as well. So, Brenden, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good. I still see Lynn on the screen there, too. Hey, what's up, Lynn? How are we doing?
What's up, talent?
I knew that was coming.
He's waiting to drop that on you.
I was going to say, should we tell him the backstory there?
Well, I mean,
yeah, we have to now.
Yeah. Well, the backstory is you can go ahead, Lynn, if you want to tell it.
Well, all right. So in spring training down in Jupiter, they gave us all, the credentials, make sure that you're not just letting anybody walk in. And so almost everybody had, and this was before we had the baseball writers ones, right? I think
the writers' cards were in the mail. We were still waiting on the cards to show up.
Yeah, so you had these Cardinals ones, and they were all, most of them were designated like, if you were, a writer, it said media on it. But then there was a few radio people, right? I think that they had, I'm trying to remember. Did anybody else have the same thing? Yours, his said talent on it.
Radio
talent. Yeah,
it would say talent because I'm a writer, but for a TV station, and so they put talent on there, and this has been my moniker for Lynn ever since.
Yeah, so I was walking around, and I was just like, wait a minute, we all just say media, but he's got talent, right? So I'm just literally walking around the clubhouse one day, I'm going like, look at you. I said, media, like I go like Katie, media, Derek, media, John Denton, media, me, media, and then I said, oh, talent. Oh, well. We just regular old media over here, but talent. So he's been talent ever since.
And this was something that three people knew about. Now the internet knows. So there we go.
There we go. I feel like now I can sign off now that we've got that out.
Yeah, you stayed just long enough for that, didn't you? Special.
That's right. That is right.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Well, thank you for dropping that on us. So let's give a different intro instead. We'd like to welcome Brenden for the talent to the podcast now.
Oh, no. Don't make that a thing.
It's been a busy offseason for the Cardinals so far, coming off a crazy year. I follow your podcast, Be Shape Daily, so I've gotten bits and pieces of your opinion on things. But for everyone who's in the chat right now, what has been your perspective of the Cardinals offseason to this point?
Well, I feel like they had a plan that they wanted to execute quickly to set sort of a foundation for the coming season. The bottom dropped out on them in 2023. We all kind of know the way that story went. And so I feel like they looked at it and said, okay, what's the way that we can guarantee that doesn't happen again, or at least go as far as we can to do so while being efficient with the money that they're spending, et cetera. And I feel like they started with kind of working in reverse, started with the bottom of that rotation and said, let's stabilize the floor. And so you go out and get a Lance Lynn, you get Kyle Gibson, guys who are, at least the way they look on paper, they're going to give you a bunch of innings. What are those innings going to look like in terms of ERA? Might be on the high side, in the high fours, into the fives, perhaps. But I think it could end up looking different than the 5s or 6 ERA guys they had last year, where you might get a good number of starts from these dudes. They go 6 innings, maybe even 7 innings, give up 3 or 4 runs. And yeah, the ERA is not going to be too kind to that necessarily, but it's going to stabilize the floor in terms of staying within that game. How many times did the Cardinals just get blown out last year? By the 2nd or 3rd inning, you thought this is over. The offense cannot be expected to battle back here. I think they're trying to, you can't eliminate that, but they're trying to find a stable floor where the bottom doesn't drop out and they don't just completely lose themselves within the early portion of the season so that they're chasing the record the rest of the way. Getting guys for the rotation had to be step number 1 with that. And so that's kind of what we've seen them do so far. Yeah.
What do you think about their floor now? Because I obviously outside of Sonny Gray, none of the moves were really flashy so far. And so you look at Twitter and there's a lot of frustration about it. But I think you make a really good point about the quality of the innings and the types of innings they're getting now. Instead of a 6 ERA guy from a guy who's giving you 3 innings to start, you're getting 6-7 innings out of a guy. What does that do for the team's floor? Like, what do you think the team's floor is coming into 2024 as things stand right now?
As it stands right now, and I've said this recently on podcasts, I feel like they need to do a little bit more on the pitching front in order to really get where they want to go. But I feel like the floor is already better with where they are now. And obviously, the caveat is if you have a ton of injuries, that can completely tank the thing. But assuming just like a regular amount of injuries, I feel like right now on the lower end would be kind of around that 80 win total. Like, and that might not get people super excited, but I also think they've got more that they have yet to come. And for me, that's kind of the median. You could also paint a really rosy picture and say, hey, the guys that they picked up, Lance Lynn, he's going to be more like he was the rest of his career rather than last year. And you're going to have health throughout your rotation, and Sonny Gray will repeat, and Miles Michaelis is going to bounce back kind of more to his norm that the Cardinals and Cardinals fans have expected of him. And then bullpen guys maybe get a little bit better health. I agree with what Mozeliak told Tom Ackerman over the weekend with regard to the back of the bullpen. Guys like Helsley, Gallegos, and Romero is a good start. So I feel like there's a stable floor there. And if you can just project a little bit on the offensive side, you can probably have a top 10 offense as they're constructed now. I think they've got to be a little bit closer to top 5 to really compete the way they want to. But yeah, I think the floor right now is about 500. Not to say it couldn't be a little worse than that, but I think reasonably that's their floor. And there's definitely room to improve upon that even without additions. But I think in order to expect playoffs, they still need to do a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the pitching throughout this because that's the theme of the offseason, but specifically the offense here. Obviously, Nolan Arenado trade off in the second half, but how much of that was because they're out of it and his injuries? Goldschmidt had a weird year. Contreras was great down the stretch, but then you had some injuries to Gorman and Newbar. How are you feeling about the offense, and do you expect them to take a step up? They were right around top 10 before the Brendan Donovan injury anyway, so I feel like that's a pretty realistic expectation. But what do you think it takes for them to go from top 10, 11 offense to get into the top 5 and be a legit unit?
You know, I think across the board, you would want to see guys be a little bit better. Guys like Goldschmidt and Arenado, I think, would probably tell you they want to have better seasons. You look at a guy like Goldschmidt and you say, oh boy, he's aged whatever he is, mid-30s. That probably means that the end is nigh and he's about to tail off. I really don't believe that necessarily has to be the case. And it doesn't necessarily, it's not based in data, this opinion, but it's more of a vibes check where, like, we all know the vibes weren't so good last year when you're in last place and you're constantly chasing your own tail to try to find it back. That can be like an exhausting mindset for a clubhouse. I think that sort of permeated everybody, and across the board, you can make the argument that it made everybody perform at a lower level than they otherwise would. If the vibes are great, everybody can kind of feed off of that and you see improvement. I think the really interesting part offensively, like Arenado, Goldschmidt, those guys should be there. I kind of think Newbar will be there. Right field, you want to get more from Jordan Walker. You want health from guys like Nolan Gorman, Brendan Donovan, but I think health assumed they're going to perform well. What does it look like? And Wilson Contreras as well. I think you can count on him offensively. Shortstop and center field. Those are the two spots that I'd be looking at to say, what do you get offensively from Mason Wynn? Is it enough that you can devote Tommy Edman to center field on a more regular basis? If so, what do you get offensively from him? Is he going to be kind of more league average the way that he has typically been? Or is there another gear to his game against right-handed pitching in particular? That same thought can be applied to Dylan Carlson as well. So, like, I think across the board, you've got, again, a stable floor with these guys, but who hits their ceiling, how many of them hit their ceiling can kind of determine where they go.
Brenden, I love that analysis right there. You're all over my Twitter feed, though, and I feel like you pride yourself on being kind of a rationalist, right? You know, someone who's honest about things. And so in the chat,
are we talking Cardinals baseball or Mizzou football? Because that there might be a distinction.
No, I get that. I get that. Yeah. No, I'm a Baylor football fan, and I thought they were going to win 8 games this year. So I know a little bit about being an irrational college football fan.
There you go.
But okay, so the chat, they want me to break the news to you. Jim was on earlier, Jim Hayes. It's nothing actually. There's some crazy comments that were made. And look, I want him to be right. And he was talking to Lars Nootbaar himself.
Okay.
And he said that Lars says there's a chance that they get Yamamoto.
Still.
I mean, what do we think? I've been quote tweeting every single day that we need Yamamoto, but it's not going to happen. Tell us a little bit about that.
Look, I mean, Jim and Lars, man, that connection is clearly very, very strong.
Yes.
That's super funny. Look, I think it's possible, but also if you want to take a look at like what the Cardinals have prescribed as what we perceive to be the budget, we know they don't want to touch the luxury tax and getting into any sort of penalties like that. There are other ways you can do that. Obviously, we learned the Dodgers found a nice little loophole for Shohei, but I think it's possible the Cardinals could be looking to make a major addition in terms of starting pitcher. Like I believe. I forget the name of the podcast, but I think Tyler Glass now kind of mentioned in passing that the Cardinals were maybe interested in trying to trade for him. So like that tells you that knowing what he's going to be paid this year, that it's not completely off the books, that it's impossible that they would do something. but we know that Yamamoto is going to get term as well, not just like the average annual value, but he's going to get a lot of years.
Yeah.
So there'd have to be some creativity. And to me, it would almost require a trade of maybe somebody like Steven Matz or other money that we're not looking at to say, all right, they can make the financials work a little bit more. I don't think it's impossible, but am I expecting it? If I put a percent on it, it's like below 10 that the Cardinals would, because we know it's a competitive market, right? Some of the teams on either
is amazing.
That's
people are
pretty
after
good.
this guy.
5%. Yeah.
I mean, that's
better.
below 10, so that would give you a single digit number.
Sure.
Let's
say
say
5%.
7%. I'll give you
That's trying
7%.
to aggregate,
That's
Sandy.
great. I love that. I need
Sandy's
that.
trying to aggregate right now.
I would have loved to have 7% if we had Brenden on before the Ohtani signing, and I got to ask him the question that I asked everyone before last week. But that's okay.
Ohtani, the number would have been lower in terms of a percentage, but
0 from the very beginning.
Yeah, it kind of seemed that way. And then you see 700 million, you go, oh yeah, that's probably why. Yeah,
no way. I think another thing that's just like kind of going underrated about this, even though like obviously I think all of us would be head over heels if they went out for Yamamoto, is I mean, before the offseason, it was 150, 175 people were talking, maybe 200, but the people saying 200, it wasn't that common. Now we're talking over 300. That's like 120% increase on a 6-figure or 9-figure contract already. And that's just unheard of. Like I was trying to go back and look at guys that have been in the high $100 million range that had that much of a percent increase in projected contract in like 5 weeks. And so I'm curious how realistic it would have been if it stayed in that range or in the 200 to 250 range, because that's well beyond what the Cardinals have done before. But now that it's 300 plus a posting fee, like I don't blame them for being out on it. But it hurts because it's like now I feel like it would have been more realistic. We could have gotten a better pulse of where they're at with this top of the market pitching if it stayed lower. And now that it's so high, they kind of have that back of their pants card, I guess, whatever you say, that okay, went too high for us. But outside of Yamamoto, what do you think are the chances that they go after someone via trade? I know that's something that a lot of people have talked about since the Sonny Gray, Kyle Gibson, and Lance Lynn signings, is that the trade market might be the other route they go. What's your kind of vibe on that right now?
I mean, I think it depends on a couple of things. It depends on their stomach for trading away people that could potentially help their team this year. Because with some of those names, and like throw some names out at me, Dylan Cease is a popular one. Do you guys have throw some names out if you've got them?
Jesus Luzardo, I feel like that's been
that'd
one
be
that's
another
out
good one.
recently.
That one's interesting too, because you got Skip Schumacher there, who he'll have his opinions on who from the Cardinals he would covet, and so there, I feel like it would make sense that you could get a deal done along those lines. But if you're the Cardinals, it kind of always comes back to those middle infielders, right? That's what it seems like in our world. Maybe the Cardinals internally are like, no, people keep talking about this, it's not going to happen. Although I would say that they haven't done a ton to necessarily quiet that down by saying, well, we got to wait and see what our roster looks like before knowing who's going to play second base. And that was kind of an Ollie Marmol quote from the winter meetings.
Yeah.
Do they really want to trade any of those guys, though? And when I say middle infield, I am counting Edman within that, even though I don't necessarily think that Tommy Edman can be mentally utilized in that way if he's going to be the center fielder, because that completely changes his role as to how the Cardinals are going to view him via trade. But like Donovan and Gorman, those are two really valuable, talented players. I really don't know the answer if you went across baseball of who would be considered the more valuable guy via trade. It's kind of interesting because when you talk to people, they're like just casually, you're like, yeah, man, I really just don't think the Cardinals should trade Brendan Donovan. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of where I am. I think he's really valuable to the team. And it's like, but Gorman, of course, has more trade value. So maybe that's the guy that you trade. I'm like, but if everybody says that, does Gorman have more trade value, or is that, you know what I'm saying? Because if it's just the assumption that everybody says, I'd prefer to make sure they hang on to Donovan, and Gorman has more value anyway. Well, if everybody says that, I don't know what the case would be. Maybe it's a very comparable but different types of players is the way they'd be viewed. Yeah. But are you willing to give up one of those and then tell a team like the White Sox, yeah, we really want Dylan Cease, you can pick the pitching prospects that you want? Because I don't know how much you could start protecting guys and saying, well, not him, if you're talking about an upper caliber. And I do believe that Dylan Cease is that type of arm. I'm not so much on the idea that Shane Bieber would make as much sense via trade, because I think you're paying for the name more so than what you can expect the production to be. But yeah, it's like, what's your stomach for trading from your active roster guys that you think will help you in 2024?
Yeah.
And I think two guys I really like. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
Two guys I really like via trade are probably not going to be available, but I feel like the Angels should rebuild, and Reed Detmers and Patrick Sandoval are two guys that only have a couple of years left on their deals, and no one really
Reed
talks about
Detmers
them
might
as
be a
trade
little more,
pieces.
right? When did Reed Detmers?
I think he has
come up? He was a 2020 guy, I think, or the
Sandoval,
draft pick.
He was.
Yeah, something like that. But I don't think they're going to be competitive anytime soon. But maybe they're going to sign Blake Snell, so who knows? But that team, I feel like could bolster their farm system a little bit. I think they're bottom, like either 29th or 30th in their prospect rankings right now, depending on where you look. So instead of giving up a Donovan or a Gorman, I feel like they would be more interested in like Tin Cans, Thomas and JC, guys who haven't come up yet. So those are guys I really like.
Yeah, and if you're talking about, I mean, Reed Detmers, I think would be fantastic. But it's like every time we think of a name like that, you led with the caveat of like, well, they're not going to trade that guy. So that's kind of, and that's what it felt like too when we would talk about the Mariners guys.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, Logan Gilbert, but it's like, if I'm the Mariners, why would I trade him? Well, they can trade one of those other guys, but even still, that's controllable pitching. How often do teams dangle that like it's not as valuable? It's extremely valuable, and I think they know that. So you could have every team saying, hey, we need some pitching help, and the Mariners are like, all right, we'll trade one of these guys, but to the highest bidder across the league. And does that mean the Cardinals get to land the trade? Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Mariners are going to sit on all those pitchers. They already have too many. Robbie Ray's coming back. But also, I mean, a counterpoint here, and I brought this up earlier with one of our other guests, the Mariners, the Marlins, and some of these other teams that have these great pitching pipelines, they haven't been able to develop offensive talent, and they're hurting in the same way for that the Cardinals are for pitching talent. You have the Marlins and their offensive prospects, Lewis Brinson, bust. Jesus Sanchez, like maybe not a bust yet, but hasn't looked great. Jazz Chisholm has really flamed out in the last 2 years. He went from someone everyone was all in on to, well, we don't know what he is now. De La Cruz hasn't been great. Even the guys they sign and bring in haven't been great. Up in Seattle, aside from Julio Rodriguez, who's really developed up there. And I think Detroit is another one. And I think they might be a more realistic trade partner than the Marlins or Mariners. I just haven't heard anyone mention them yet. But these other, like, the point is these other teams, like, they're hurting too. They need offensive talent. And I think that's why the Cardinals have a little more leverage than people think here. Because, like, again, whatever the Mariners or Marlins or Tigers seem to try, they can't get it right.
Yeah, I feel like the Marlins, just on paper, would make so much sense because they've got guys that haven't even gotten to the big leagues yet. Or, like, I haven't kept up on what the rehab has been like for Max Meyer, but he was like, they've got all these dudes that, like, eventually that's going to be more than 5. But I think the understanding is pitchers get hurt. And so if you've got 9 of them and 3 of them are constantly on the 60-day IL, then suddenly you don't have the depth that you thought you did. I could see Tigers. Mariners is so interesting because you talk about the needing offense. So I think you're right. To trade Jared Kelenic for basically just to dump
a
money,
bag of peanuts.
That is probably, and I'm not saying he has totally lived up to the billing, but solid offensive numbers, good enough to where I'm like, are you kidding me? Like that was probably the one move of the offseason that shocked me the most. Now we've since seen like kind of what the operational standard is. The Braves are continuing to do that where they say, we don't care if we take on bad money if we're getting the pieces that we want. They did the same with Matt Carpenter this week. So that was the one thing where I'm like, I can't even project what to think of the Mariners if they're doing stuff like that. But in theory, I think you're pretty much spot on with why the Cardinals would match with those various teams.
I just want to talk about the Mariners for one more second. I'm sorry. My roommate in college is a huge Mariners fan. He's from Seattle. He's suffered his whole life as a Mariners fan, he says all the time. And the night they made that Kelenic trade, he came into our apartment and just started screaming. He was so mad. He said, it's our starting right fielder. For what? He wants Jerry fired. I think a lot of Mariners fans are starting to get really frustrated with Dipoto. But, like, is there any way that they don't trade at least somebody here? You've got Castillo, Ray, Gilbert, and
Kirby.
Kirby. Yeah, I'm totally blanking on that.
Miller,
and those
Wu.
are like locked in as your top 4. But then you've got Miller, Wu, Hancock. They've got and Matt Brash. They thought could be a starter.
Love Matt Brash.
He's a bullpen guy now, but he's elite in the bullpen. How are they going to hold on to all this pitching?
Well, I think Matt Brash, you just sit him in his role, and it's wonderful because you don't need him in the rotation. I I don't know what it would cost, but we can play the fun speculative game. And it's like, all right, they don't want to trade you Gilbert. They're not trading Kirby. Is Miller or Wu with Brash? Like, what does that take to get both? Because a lot, absolutely a lot. But that's the point at which I'm like, again, I've said Cardinals trading Brendan Donovan to me doesn't make any sense. You're not just going to float Nolan Gorman, just because you see a need and you can make that fit all nice and tidy. Like, left-handed power with the capability to hit 40 home runs is not something that grows on trees. So you're not just going to be reckless with that. But if you're Brash with one of their good young starters, I'd be like, okay, that, and then how many pitching prospects does it take from the St. Louis side to make everybody happy? I don't think would be crazy. But again, like for John Mozeliak, look at the types of trades that has been made. It's easy to trade for Arenado and Goldie when you know the circumstances of those deals. We can talk about the Ozuna trade not going the right way, but that was unproven talent for a guy that you perceived to be a proven talent. We didn't know what those two pitchers were going to turn into at the time. This would be like guys that are playing well, have done things in the big leagues for guys that are playing well and have done things in the big leagues, just like different positionally. And I feel like we haven't really seen those types of trades from Mo in recent history. Even like Tyler O'Neill. Okay, the whole world knows you're going to trade him, but that sort of depreciates what you're going to get for him. And so you get some relief pitchers that might end up panning out, but it's not like you're pick a guy that would have been on that team and said, oh, they traded Tyler O'Neill to the Red Sox. They got so-and-so as a reliever. Makes sense. They're both kind of proven. It wasn't going to go that way.
Yeah.
Would Mo be able to kind of finagle the market and make that true baseball trade that we haven't seen in a while? That would be another question.
Yeah. Something I'm starting to become a little bit more interested in is based on how they kind of construct the roster and how they want to divvy up playing time this year. I've been super anti-trading Nolan Gorman or Brendan Donovan and want to like make it a prospect package if you're going to do something. But if they're going to DH Contreras maybe once or twice a week, if they're going to give Goldie and Arenado DH appearances a week, I mean, maybe if you play 6 games every 7 days, is that 2 DH spots open to Donovan and Gorman? Then it's hard to play the game there. And if Newbar's not going to play center, he's in left, Walker's in right, so you can't put Donovan in left or right field. If that's kind of the direction they're heading in, does it make more sense to you to give up one of those guys because the playing time just isn't, not that it's not there, but it's not like they're going to be, it just feels like one of them's not going to play as much as you would hope. And so maybe it makes more sense to cash in and go after a starter. If that's kind of the direction they're heading in, does it make more sense for you to move on for one of those guys, or do you still hold on to them with everything you can? And obviously you're not giving them up for nothing, but are you more willing to dangle them if that's the direction they're headed in?
I think that these things tend to work themselves out in terms of playing time, because how many, like by the end of the season, and I know it's because they were out of it, but they had everybody on the injured list. Like you had these random dudes that were playing, and you're like, how do you like square that circle mentally with looking at next year's team and going, well, there's no room to play everybody, when you know how easily it can all go poof in terms of player health. But like, I think if you did some back of the napkin math, you could find a way to, all right, Contreras is probably going to DH, I would say 1.5 times a week, because they do seem to want to get Ivan Herrera in there and used as like the full scale backup catcher and then some. So he'll play. Donovan can play some left field. You're right, though. Are they unwilling to move Newt to center at all? Or is that just like the story of the offseason, and then you get in the middle of it and Dylan Carlson's not hitting well or whatever, and they just say, all right, it's easiest to move him. And that's how you get Donovan in there. Gorman can DH a little bit. You can have, what's up, Jeff? You can have Donovan, and he's on Team Donovan now as well in terms of, I consider Jeff a bit of a late adopter, because I remember about a year ago we would talk about it and I'd say, I don't know, I think you got to protect Brendan Donovan. I think he's on my side now. Not that I'm anti-Nolan Gorman either, but I think I could just like leave right now and have him answer the question, because I think it's a good one to get multiple perspectives on. No, I don't think that I'm too concerned with how do you find the playing time for everybody, because there's enough flexibility that it'll work things out. But I also think it's true that they should be a little bit more firm in where they play guys, because they'll get better results defensively from them, and that'll help your pitching staff. And yeah, they got better in terms of strikeout rate with their pitchers they've picked up, but not a ton. Like Kyle Gibson isn't really a strikeout guy. Sonny Gray, very much solid, and Lance Lynn should be solid. But to me, there's still not enough to where you can just kind of forego defense and say, play everybody wherever because we're just going to strike everybody out. I don't know if that'll work either.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, Jeff Jones, thanks for hopping in here. Want to give you a quick intro, real quick. The kind of conversation point.
Yeah,
he just snuck in. One of the what we're talking about here is this idea that as you kind of do the math a little bit about playing time coming into this year, if Contreras is going to DH 1-2 times a week, Nolan Arenado and Goldie maybe once a week, the DH appearances start to thin out a little bit. If Nootbaar's not going to be playing center field, then Brendan Donovan can't necessarily go play the corner outfields all that often, especially if Carlson's the fourth outfielder. So does it make more sense? Like, does it potentially make more sense to trade a Donovan or a Gorman if that's the scenario that's at large here? Or are you kind of on the side of the injuries will make it happen, people will find their playing time, it's not necessarily worth dangling one of them for a top pitching process or top pitcher in the league?
Yeah, so I sort of said early in the winter, kind of throughout the winter, that to me it made sense to clear up second base with one of those three guys, the two you mentioned, and also Tommy Edman, figuring out what the value looks like maybe on the pitching market for those guys. I will say, given the way they've kind of constructed their roster to date and what they did and haven't done in the starter market, I would be hesitant to trade either one of those guys for a reliever, right? If we were talking earlier in the winter and we're talking about the possibility of Gorman for one of the Seattle guys, for instance, or is Donovan at the top of the deal for Dylan Cease? If you wanted to pursue that sort of deal, I think that's one thing, right? I don't know that if they're in a spot where they're prepared to sort of flip pieces for relievers, that would not be the way I would go about getting that sort of thing done.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Jeff, I think something that we want to probe you a little bit here. We've probed most of our guests because we let off with Jeff Hayes at the beginning, and he just decided to drop a bomb on everyone that I think we're all very cautious about still, but I feel like you've been giving a lot of really good insight on the Yamamoto side of things in the Cardinals, saying there's people within the Cardinals front office screaming, I think it was the word you said, like for Yamamoto. Jim Hayes said at the beginning that he just interviewed Lars Nootbaar today, and he asked him straight up, do you think that the Cardinals still have a chance at Yamamoto? Like, is this done or not? And he said they're still in and that there's still a chance there. Anything on your end about what that looks like? I know we're hitting 300 million. I know Jim Hayes he's a fireball, but like, what is this looking like right now?
I think that the last couple of weeks have been pretty discouraging on that front, just in terms of we have a pretty good idea now of who the 7 teams were that he met with. Are those exclusively the people that he's considering? Did he go meet with teams because he had relationships with others and didn't feel the need to, et cetera, et cetera? Who's to say? I will say the fact that Yuki Matsui came to town and that got pretty quickly snuffed out, or it's not, well, I guess also snuffed out, but sniffed out as well, suggests to me that it would be hard for them to get Yamamoto done under cover of darkness, and I don't believe that has happened, right? So look, if Lars Nootbaar says they're still in, I guess he would know.
It's a source off.
Anyone else
Jones v. Newt. That's what we have.
Right. That is officially new news, I think. So, look, I think if it were to happen at this point, I would say I would be shocked. Is probably what I would say. There were definitely those in the front office who were advocating hard for this for a long time before this offseason, stretching back, a period of a year, maybe even, advocating for this to happen. And I think in seeing kind of where the bidding went, I think we have an idea of why the Cardinals maybe have not been as involved in what looks like late stages as they might have thought that they would. I think a year ago, the Cardinals may have thought that Yamamoto would have been maybe in the vicinity of 150 as the total investment even, right? And now a year long, maybe we're talking about double that just for his deal before you even get to the posting fees. So given the way that the market has unfolded, I would be pretty shocked at this point, but I suppose never say never until it's done.
Yeah, we were just talking about that with Brendan a little bit, that it's like not even just before the season was it 150, 180. Like most people were saying that before the offseason started. So it's been like almost barely 2 months and his contract has doubled. And I can't think of a comp of a player that was already projected 150, 170 million that has doubled in value potentially in like 8 weeks. So there's a part of me that's like, I wonder if you could speak to this too. If they're even in the 200, 250 million range, do you think it's like we're talking the Cardinals as a more significant player here? Or do you think maybe the 150, 175 is where they're kind of going to tap out regardless? Because now that it's in the 300s, I don't really blame them for being out on it at this point, because that's crazy how much his market.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think that one thing that we should probably be careful about is I'm not sure, unless I've missed something. I don't think the reporting has been real specific about whether that 300 number would be his deal or whether that would be the all-in number, right? So if say 45 of that is the posting fee, then it's still a ton, but maybe it's a little closer to what they thought reality was going to be. Yeah, look, I think if the Cardinals thought that they could get Yamamoto done for, call it, 7 and 210, right? I think that probably would be an area where that's a big pill for them, but they would be willing to probably go there. So if they're not there, that tells you it probably has pushed pretty well past that, or at least has pushed into areas where, if Yamamoto ends up signing a deal that is, let's say, 9 and 280, but there's an opt-out after 2 or 3, and those first 3 years are pretty heavily front-loaded, you can sort of see where that might have gone, right? Like I can see where maybe the number is not going to look as egregious as we all think right now, but it still would be past an area where the Cardinals might be maximally comfortable.
And just wrapping up this tweet, Jeff Jones says 7 and 210. Cardinals are willing to. All right, I think that's like you to get on out of here.
It's funny, Brenden. Before you go, I did want to point out. I realized the other day the number that I gave you for the scary Shohei fake number turned out to be the number of his deferral. And in fact,
that is
close.
True.
I said 12,680, and that's the deferral.
We were in Nashville, and Jeff and I split a hotel room, and he wakes up earlier than me. So I wake up one morning, and he goes 12 and 680 for Shohei to the Red Sox. And I'm a little groggy, and I go, "Did you just say 680?" And turns out that wasn't the full contract, but you did, on the deferrals.
Yeah, I got the deferral right.
The Red Sox, it was creative enough to maybe try and get me, but nevertheless,
toast, I guess.
Yeah, not bad. All right, you guys are in good hands with Jeff, so I'm going to head on out of here. But thanks for having me; it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Brenden.
Thanks for joining us,
awesome.
Brenden.